On the morning of January the 13th, 1885, the badly beaten bodies of Thomas Anketel, manager, and Henry Burrup, clerk, were found at the recently constructed Union Bank in Roubourne. The murder weapons were probably a hatchet and a pickaxe, and it has been thought that perhaps more than one person was involved. How was it that two men sleeping in separate areas of the bank could be murdered in a way where no noise or commotion was heard from the bank by those who lived not far away? Witnesses reported that Anketel had been at the local hotel the night before. He had been drinking and gambling and returned to the bank with Roderick McRae before deciding to retire to the back veranda sometime around midnight. Anketel chose to sleep on the veranda to escape the heat of the building. Burrup had arrived back at the bank around 1 a.m. after visiting friends, and he retired to his room. The bodies were discovered about 6:40 a.m. the following morning, and the police and a medical officer were called. Both men had extensive head injuries, and Burrup had a pillow placed over his head after the injuries were sustained. It was estimated that the time of death was around 4 to 6 hours earlier, but forensic methods of the time were not wholly accurate. The lack of a commotion may mean that both men were killed instantly by the first blow, and this was the conclusion at the time. Oddly though, both men had been savagely beaten after they had died, and this suggests that the murderer was in some sort of rage. So was the motive a bank robbery, or was it something else entirely? A sloppy investigation and lack of attention to these murders by the authorities led to claims that there had been some sort of cover-up. After complaints about the lack of action by Burrup's father, a reward of £500 was offered, and a pardon for any accomplice not actually involved in the murder itself. Frederick Bevan, Charles Warburton, and Sankey were eventually tried for the murder of Thomas Anketel, but were found not guilty. For reasons best known to the prosecutors, nobody was charged with the murder of Henry Burrup. There certainly must have been a lot of suspicion about who was responsible, for it was said the murderer died sometime later in Singapore. It was in fact Roderick McRae who had died from the effects of syphilis in Singapore hospital. Despite the fact that he had been suspected of the murders, were his family connections and wealth enough to get the police to look the other way? Another possibility was raised by prospector Frank Camilleri, after a German by the name of Frank Honig visited his camp in the Halls Creek goldfield one night. The subject of the murders at Roubourne came up, and Honig was very dismissive of the police efforts, and Camilleri became suspicious. Soon after Honig left, a party came through looking for the German, as he was wanted in connection with the murder of two other men on the goldfield. Honig was eventually arrested and executed for the killings, so no concrete proof of his involvement in the killings of Burrup and Anketel emerged. So who was responsible for these shocking murders in a small northwest town? Although we'll never know for sure, there is quite a bit of evidence that points to Roderick McRae, including inconsistencies in his own statements. McRae was never formally or aggressively questioned about these inconsistencies, and this does rather smack of a cover-up by the authorities. Anketel remains almost forgotten, while Henry Burrup, from a richer family, is remembered in the naming of the Burrup Peninsula.